Welcome to Disunion, the Government Union Report, the podcast where we delve into the ever-evolving landscape of public sector labor policy and law.
All right, today we're speaking with Corey DeAngelis, a senior fellow at the American Culture Project. He's also senior advisor to Americans for Fair Treatment and a visiting fellow at the American Institute for Economic Research. He holds a PhD in education policy from the University of Arkansas. And in the first here, we've got two guests today. Our second is Christos Makridis, an associate research professor at the Arizona State University School of Business. Guys, thanks for coming on today.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you, David.
Well, I asked Corey and Christos to come on the podcast to discuss a working paper that I came across. It's on SSRN. It's called Administrative Expansion in Public Schools, the Role of Unions in Resource Allocation and Student Performance. It is a fascinating investigation with some pretty controversial findings. So, gentlemen, tell us about the question you sought to address here and how you sought to answer it.
Yeah, so I'm always going to battle with the teachers' unions. So this actually came about because of a viral post on X, which I spend too much time on social media these days, but sometimes it leads to a research paper. So basically, Elon Musk reposted one of my charts that I had put together pretty quickly on Excel. And my caption was that the government school system has become more of a jobs program for adults than an education initiative for kids. And what it showed was nationwide data from 2000 to today, tracing trends in student enrollment and also different employees in the system. And what it shows is basically since 2000, student enrollment has been essentially flat, basically no change. But the number of teachers in the system has increased by about 10%, and the number of administrators in the system has increased by a whopping 95%, according to data from the National Center for Education Statistics. And so the theory that we laid out in this paper is basically that the teachers' unions engage in rent seeking every step of the way. We already knew that. But they also have an incentive to just pour more and more resources towards putting more people into the buildings, because that means more dues paying members and more union foot soldiers to fight for their political pet projects. So they have a stronger voting bloc that way, and they have more total revenues that way as well. Whereas if they were to spend that money on teachers' salaries, then they wouldn't be able to hire as many people. So these things are more like political organizations than even teacher benefit organizations or education organizations. So we put the data together, and Christos can talk a little bit about the methodology.
Yeah. I always, I mean, Corey is phenomenal, and we've had the chance to work together for a number of years, and I always love how we sometimes have this like good cop, bad cop mentality, because he's out in the front lines doing a lot of work with, social media and so on, and so I remember when Corey mentioned this idea to me, I was like, this is a great empirical question, is we see this in the national data, let's see if we can take this to more micro data and see, after we control for potential omitted variables, potential confounding factors, whether we still find an effect. And whenever Corey has a hypothesis, it's usually something that there's a there because he's seen it on the front lines. And so what we did is we took the data from the NCES at a school district level for over a decade. And so for every school district that the NCES has data over, we put that together. Then we matched it with data from the Census Bureau. So the census also puts out data on demographics about areas. So things like median household income, the share of African Americans, the share white, the share Hispanic, etc. So we had all these demographic factors, and crucially, unionization rates, which we got from the current population survey. So we put all that all together and then ran a series of statistical models where we look at, is there an association between unionization and staff to student ratios, even after you control for time series factors, so just like national changes in the macroeconomy and so on, demographic differences across zip codes, so that we had this very granular data at a zip code level. And the short answer is yes, that result still holds true, that there is a positive association between unionization and staff to student ratios. And in addition to that, we found that the effect is concentrated in states that didn't have right to work laws. So basically, that surge in staff to student ratios was concentrated in the states without the right to work laws, which was consistent with theory, because that goes back to some of our prior work in the space, which is that right to work laws give workers additional choice and autonomy to decide whether to be in it or not. And that actually creates a competitive pressure to the union, because they know that if they're not creating value for their members, then they won't join. They only join by out of mandate. And so that's basically what we found. And the last thing just to note is that we asked, does this ripple effect onto student outcomes? And we provided some evidence there as well. We found that it seems like that the higher staff to student ratios are also associated with lower test scores in reading and math in 4th and 8th grade. And just to put the cherry on top, the paper should be out in the not too distant future in a leading political science journal. So we finished up the revisions from the referees just a few weeks ago, and hopefully it'll make its ascent from being a working paper to a published article in the not too distant future.
Very interesting. All right, well, let's talk about teacher pay for a minute. So you would assume that with stronger unions and with more money, you'd also be able to pay your teachers quite a bit more. What did you find out with regard to the incentives for teachers to attend to their children in their classrooms?
I don't think we looked at teacher pay specifically in this article, but if you look over time, the trend has been pretty clear that if you're spending the money on administrative bloat, you have less money for the classroom. And so we have data at NCES since about 1970 to today. The per student spending in the public school system has increased by about 164% after adjusting for inflation. The outcomes haven't gotten 164% better, but that raises the question of how much of that money has gone towards teacher pay over time. Well, their salaries on average have been flat since 1970, only a 3% increase in teacher salaries since 1970. So you have some people benefiting from the system. You have Randy Weingarten and Becky Pringle, who make over $500,000 a year each, to do what? To scream at their annual conventions, to pass resolutions, to cut ties with the ADL, to pass resolutions to label Trump as a fascist while misspelling the word fascism in the same resolution. They've gone off the wall with their far left radical politics. And aside from the working paper, which will be peer reviewed and published hopefully soon, I think this is a call to action for teachers to dismantle the system from the inside. If they're getting the short end of the stick, the public school monopoly doesn't just hurt the parents and their kids. That was obvious. It obviously hurts the customers, but it hurts the employees too, because it's also a monopsony. It has no incentive to spend money wisely, it has no incentive to care about their employees. And so the teachers, post the Janus decision from 2018, they can now opt out of their union. They're no longer compelled to do so, whether you're in a red state or a blue state. And so they can starve the beast and dismantle the teachers union from the inside. And that'll give the union bosses like Randy and Becky an incentive, at least, to change their tune. Stop focusing on politics, get it out of the classroom, focus on the basics, and maybe, focus on member benefits. How about focusing on teacher salaries and other autonomy for the teachers, as opposed to restorative justice policies that create war zones in classrooms that are unsafe for kids and teachers alike. And so there's a group called the Teacher Freedom Alliance that just started up this year, that announced this year that they now provide free liability insurance to teachers. That's about $2 million per teacher, whereas Randy's union typically only provides about half that amount, about $1 million. Because the question has been raised, Janus passed and some teachers have left the union, but not as many would have preferred. And, an Education Week survey from 2017, it's outdated, we need a new one, but that found that only 41% of teachers identify as Democrats, whereas about 99% of the campaign contributions from Randy Weingarten's union goes to the Democratic Party. Her union has basically become a money laundering operation for the Democrats as opposed to an educational institution. And so the 59% of teachers who don't identify as Democrats would be crazy to continue funneling their money, their hard-earned cash, to Democrat campaign coffers every single year if they're no longer compelled to do so. A lot of them were fearful that they would need that liability insurance that was provided by the union, which used to be in the union's name, not even in the individual's name. But now groups like the Teacher Freedom Alliance, I know there's others like the Association of American Educators and Christian Educators as well, they're providing this liability insurance in some cases for free to teachers to opt out. So I think there's a two-pronged approach going forward to hold unions accountable. School choice, let people vote with their feet in terms of parents holding the monopoly accountable, but then teacher choice too. We don't just need a parent revolution, we also need a teacher revolution to win the war by fighting on multiple fronts.
So Corey, you mentioned Janus. I want to ask Christos. You talked about right to work being a way to sort of to measure union strength, I suppose. Well, Janus has essentially given us right to work in every school district, not in every business, but in every public institution. Do you expect that it follows that the union will lose strength as a result, and maybe you'll see higher student outcomes?
Yeah, it's a good question. I actually just wanted to pick really quickly on something else that Corey flagged that is important, namely that in this paper we also disaggregated the staff to student ratio composition, and we looked at staff that was more administrative related and staff that was like actually teacher focused, and most of the increases coming from administrative. And so that just goes back to the question that you asked earlier about why aren't we seeing greater increases in pay? Like 3% is like nothing. They basically count that as zero because inflation is already 3% or upward of 3%. And so basically zero real wage increases. And so a lot of that is going to extra admin costs that isn't necessarily translating into value added as measured by any student outcomes that matter. And then Corey and I also have a paper with another good friend of ours named Clara Piano that we studied homeschooling and the rise of homeschooling. So that wouldn't have increased so much if the school quality was going up. So now coming back to the question that you just asked as it relates to Janus, it's a big question around what drives entry or exit into and out of a union, because there's all these peer groups. And so I think Corey kind of hit on it earlier, is that we might expect to see a little bit more exit out post this decision. But if all the teachers are basically, you see them every day, and if you personally want to leave, but other people don't want to leave, and there's a little bit of peer pressure, just like there is in the playground, there is in the classroom as well. And so there needs to be a climate of not just like fake tolerance, but of real choice and autonomy and preserving the sovereignty of parents, of teachers, and so on. So that's probably why there hasn't been as much dynamics in the entry exit as we maybe would expect. But we do see a decline in unionization post Janus. One of my other papers, and that actually was my first into this whole area, was a paper in Journal of Law and Economics about the effects of right to work laws. And that was the one where I did what's called a difference in difference estimator, where you have a treated unit, which is the state adopting right to work, and then you have a pre and post. So you're basically comparing states that adopt right to work, and you're comparing before and after with the ones that didn't adopt. And what I found there was that there was an increase in worker well-being after the adoption of right to work laws. And again, that's maybe counterintuitive that the increase in well-being was actually concentrated among union workers. The exact people that maybe people that are very opposed to right to work would say this is harming. And so I think this goes exactly to what Corey stressed earlier about competition and choice, and that it needs to be preserved both at the parental level, but also kind of at the school level.
I think David also brought up a good point about the peer effects and this, the unionization rate and reducing that over time post Janus. Yes, it'll require people not being worried about their liability insurance that was covered by the union, but also they don't want to get bullied in the school system. And I hear time and time again that stories of teachers getting their tires slashed for leaving the union, and there's a lot of these mob boss tactics within the public school system. And so this reminds me of the COVID era and how parents started to fight back. And Moms for Liberty was part of this solution to the problem of parents thinking that, well, if I stick my neck out, well, there's going to be retaliation against my kids. So they thought there's no use at going and fighting back at the school board meeting. I don't have anybody on my team. Nobody's got my back. But then when you had these groups form either on social media or with official groups like Moms for Liberty, the parents started to become more emboldened to say, you know what? When I say something at the school board meeting, it goes viral. I might even end up on the news in a positive way because I have so many people out there that also support what I'm doing. I think this is also the key, taking the same playbook from Moms for Liberty and transitioning it to an idea like Teachers for Liberty. And so like these groups like the Teacher Freedom Alliance are so important going forward, because then it's like a support group where teachers could lock arms and say, you know, if I'm not the only one leaving, it doesn't become a scary task anymore. And I think that's going to be key to victory going forward.
Well, I mean, that's crazy that they're getting their tires slashed. I mean, I think this just goes to show there's so much stuff that happens in darkness, and it just needs to be brought to light. Like, that should, everybody, regardless of where they stand on the political spectrum, should be like, no teacher should get their tires slashed because they want to leave the union and somebody else is doing that towards them. So there is a cultural issue that needs to be dealt with, and it needs to be brought out front and center. And, yeah, I mean, people need to be given the choice about whether to now, if somebody decides, oh, I really value those benefits, maybe there's an educational issue. Like, for example, when Corey mentioned the association that exists that provides the same sort of benefits at maybe even lower cost or higher value. Maybe that's an educational issue, but hopefully everybody that listens to this podcast and that just out there in the world can agree tires shouldn't be slashed. That's not a helpful thing to do in the world. But yeah, sometimes when there's a lot of money at stake, people do things that they know that if they took their kindergarten class, they realize they shouldn't be doing. Maybe they need to go back to kindergarten. But
well, for that reason, I found it in working with teachers. I found it, in a 100% membership school district, it takes so much for that first person to leave, and then increasingly, as more people leave, it takes less and less motivation.
Yeah, they get courage.
Yeah, but I could see that being sort of the initial challenge after Janus, is to sort of break through that culture. There is an informational issue as well. Having worked with some teachers and looked at a lot of collective bargaining agreements, some collective bargaining agreements will still indicate that there is no right to work in that particular district, so that someone has to pay a fee as a condition of their employment. If a conscientious teacher was reading their collective bargaining agreement and didn't see the news about Janus, they wouldn't have any idea that, in fact, they could leave.
Wow. Wait, so you're saying there are some teachers that are paying a fee to be a teacher with...
So they're not paying a fee. They're members of the union.
Yeah.
What they don't know is that if they were to leave, they could pay zero instead of basically 80 to 90% of the...
So there's like this information asymmetry that maybe the union is arbitraging on and getting them to keep paying the fee even though they don't need to be. Yeah.
Yeah. The only change that a lot of these unions have made to those provisions is now some of them, in order to preserve those provisions and not lose ground at collective bargaining, the next, if Janus were to be overturned, they'll leave a provision in there that says if Janus is ever overturned, or if there's a constitutional amendment to change Janus, which seems really far-fetched, then once again the fair share fees will be imposed in this particular district.
Yeah, David, you had asked about student outcomes and how we expect that they will change if people leave the union. Yeah, I think the union will start to have an incentive to do a better job, or else they'll be destroyed, essentially. I mean, if you think about it, the NEA has 3 million members about nationwide. They're the largest labor union in the country. By the way, they have a federal charter, which they've had for over 100 years, since 1906. They're the only labor union in the country that has this special privilege. They're also the union that passed wacky resolutions that read more like a declaration of war on the Trump administration than anything else this year. And in 2019, back when they made these things public, they killed a resolution to rededicate themselves to being about student learning. So I just want to, as an aside, say we should yank that federal charter, get rid of it, no more picking winners and losers, and bestowing this special privilege to this union that has basically changed from supposedly being about education to being a far left money laundering operation for the Democrat Party, if you look at their campaign contributions every year. Or there's another bill in Congress right now to use that federal charter against them. So, hey, if you want to keep that special status, fine, but you're going to have to deal with all of these other stipulations, including making it illegal for the NEA to engage in political activity. That will have the NEA begging for Congress to revoke their federal charter if they were to pass the bill that I referenced. But there was a study that came out. I think with the 3 million members, if you were to get the 59% of teachers who don't identify as Democrats, who do identify as either independents or conservatives, to opt out because they don't want that money going to their political opponents, whether they like it or not, they can opt out. And if you say like that's what $1 million or $1,000 a teacher every year on average, I don't know what the actual number is, but for the sake of argument, that could be over $1 billion that you defund from the NEA if they were to all leave. Of course, they're not going to leave right away, but if the NEA starts to see the writing on the wall and say, you know what, we better change what we're doing, because maybe they won't listen to the general public being upset with them when they lobbied the CDC to make it more difficult to reopen schools. Maybe they don't care if the parents are upset about the failures in their schools. Chicago has 55 public schools with not a single kid proficient in math, and their teachers union boss, despite calling school choice racist a couple of years ago, now sends her own son to a private school. They're total hypocrites, and they've been insulated from accountability. But I think the only true form of accountability for some of these union bosses is to hit them where it hurts and have teachers flee the system and pull their funding away from those monsters. And then the union bosses will have to pivot and focus less on politics, more on the kids. And I think this will ultimately help the teachers because it'll be driven by teacher movement, and less of that money will be going on towards administrative bloat. More of it will be going towards the classroom, towards the teachers doing a good job. And it'll ultimately help the students too. There was a paper that just came out this year, I believe, at the National Bureau for Economic Research. Christos, I'm sure you've seen this. David, you might have seen it as well. It was by Barbara Biasi.
Barbara, yeah. We went to
I think she's at Yale.
Me about that one.
And they found, her and her co-author found that Wisconsin's Act 10, which weakened the teachers' unions there, over time, it reduced union dues and revenues. We knew that. We knew that was going to happen. But it also had the effect of reducing political contributions to Democrats. You and all of us on this call understand that that's an obvious result, but most people don't see the connection between, the teachers union being an extension of the Democrat Party. Fewer teachers union dues being cut off will cut off dues ultimately to the Democrat Party. And then they also found that this didn't hurt teacher pay. It also improved student test scores. I believe it was even bigger benefits for lower income students. And they also found a side benefit for Republican politicians in that it led to more votes for Republicans. So, if you are, and that shouldn't be surprising either. If you have fewer contributions going to Democrat campaigns, money leads to votes. They have less money going towards their campaigns. They're going to receive fewer votes than the Republicans as a percentage.
I saw in your paper, and I can't remember if it was your research or if you were citing someone else, but that after Act 10, there was a dip in student performance, possibly related to teachers leaving or being reshuffled without a contract to prevent that kind of thing. So an immediate drop, but then over time, what you saw was a lessening effect due to bloating in the administrative areas of the school district. and more focus on teaching and on the students themselves. Was that your finding, or were you citing that from someone else?
Must have been another study, but I mean, even during the COVID era, we saw, you can zoom into individual districts and see this bloat problem. I mean, one, they spent their $190 billion in COVID relief money, not on safely reopening schools. A lot of them put into their reopening plans that they were going to spend the COVID relief funding on hiring more people. Yeah. And if you just look at the trends in Chicago, for example, this was a union that tweeted out that it was racist to reopen schools, while they had a board member vacationing in Puerto Rico over 1,000 miles away saying it was too unsafe to go back to work, but somehow it was safe enough to go travel poolside, taking selfies on Instagram. Her name was Sarah Justice. She was a board member at the CTU. I don't know if she still is. And by the way, Randy Weingarten was a at-large member of the Democrat National Committee for 23 years, and nobody knew about this. David, I didn't know about it, but I felt dumb at first. I was like, New York Times is reporting it this year and acting like, everybody knew this. And I started messaging my friends like, did I miss the memo here? I didn't know Randy Weingarten had a seat at the table at the DNC for over 2 decades. She was at the Rules Committee since 2009, and she left this year because on a podcast she said people weren't listening to her or something along those lines. She wrote a letter when she left. But Becky Pringle at the NEA still has an at-large position at the DNC for who knows how long. But, I often say that the union is an extension of the Democrat Party, but they're almost one and the same thing. I mean, you have the union bosses. They're there. They are part of the DNC. So I also did some digging after that, finding that the head of the Arizona Education Association, I think her name is Marisol, she also is an at-large member of the DNC. There are others as well who ended up blocking me after I exposed them on X. They're like little cockroaches. You turn the light on and they scurry away. But
he's making friends. He's yeah.
I'm not making enemies. They're already my enemies. But the reason I brought this up was that Chicago's data showed that Illinois Policy Institute reported this recently, that since 2019, the students, and everybody knows students are leaving Chicago. Their student enrollment has dropped by 10% since 2019. That's not even a long-term thing. But the overall staffing increased by 20%. So just in what other industry, David, do you lose 10% of your customer base? You're losing fun, and then you say, oh, it's a good idea to go on a hiring spree and increase employment at your company by 20%. You wouldn't do that in the private sector. So, FDR had it right. We should abolish public sector unions entirely. There's an inherent conflict of interest. They're not negotiating at the bargaining table with someone who has a different agenda than them. In Chicago, they're negotiating with Mayor Brandon Johnson, who was a CTU organizer, who had his biggest contributor millions of dollars from the Chicago Teachers Union when he was running for office. They drug him across the finish line in a deep blue city. He only beat the independent challenger who was siding with a lot of the Republicans, Paul Vallis, by like 3.5% from what I remember. So the unions use their political muscle to get people into office and then go. It shouldn't surprise us that Mayor Brandon Johnson basically pressured the whole school board to resign by calling for a high-interest payday loan, hundreds of millions of dollars, when the city was already $500 million in a deficit. He wanted to give the unions all the little goodies to spend more money when they're already dedicating over $30,000 a year to each student in the public school system. It's not going to the student, though. It's going towards the system. And the kids are getting the short end of the stick. And unfortunately, so are the teachers.
So let me give you a problem here. And Christos, I want to make sure you're brought in on this one. I got just the other day, the Philadelphia Federation of Teachers membership ratified an agreement. The union represents not just teachers, but they represent, school psychologists, they represent school nurses, paraprofessionals. They seem to represent just about everybody who works for the school district. So no surprise that the contract, that the details that we know about, that individual teachers are going to get a small bonus, something like $1,300, and a 3% increase in pay over the next each year will be 3% more. Basically, the nothing that you mentioned earlier. And meanwhile, some of these non-teaching educators and paraprofessionals get pretty large increases relative to that. They'll get the 3%, but they'll also get extra incentives based on what kind of work they do. So if you're a union, forget the politics for a second. How do you negotiate without increasing administrative bloat if that's how you get the most money from the school district? How should this work?
Yeah, I think you nailed it. It's that the incentives are kind of misaligned from the start because, it's like paying somebody based off of commission. If you sell more, then you're going to get paid more. It's a similar way here. If you bring in more members, if you expand the base, then that's going to increase your remuneration. But what we really need is a link to student outcomes, some performance pay that's tied to how are students doing? Because why do universities and schools exist? It is to make people better off. It's to invest in human capital. And so if performance pay isn't linked to concrete outcomes that are about the learner, not about the ecosystem, not about more teachers, but about the learner, then there's going to be a fundamental misalignment. And so to that end, there's actually a voluminous body of work that exists on performance pay in education. I'd say a naive interpretation of that literature says that you can't use performance pay because it's hard to measure outcomes in the educational sphere. And I say it's a naive interpretation because there's actually, of course you can measure things poorly, but there's also ways to measure things well. It's like you don't say, oh, we can't go to the moon because designing a spaceship is hard. It's like, let's put our heads together and figure out how to do physics and go to the moon. So if we can go to the moon, we can design assessments for teachers, for students. And actually, there's been a number of papers that have done this well. Even Raj Chetty, John Friedman, Nate Hendren, others had this paper, this two-series teacher value-added paper that came out back-to-back in AER a number of years ago, where as long as you have panel data on teachers, then you can, and you link that with data on student outcomes, you can extract a common signal from a teacher. So not trying to go in the weeds on how to do that, but just saying that there is a way to figure out what is signal and what is noise when you're looking at a bunch of students and teachers over time and come to a way of aligning incentives. But just coming back to where you started the question, I think you set it up just saying, hey, incentives are misaligned right now, and we're not going to see advances in learner outcomes until that gets rectified.
Yeah, and the teachers unions fight against pay for performance every step of the way. I just saw an article out of Florida, of all places, where the union I think they were suing against a differentiated pay plan. And look, that hurts the best teachers, obviously, because the unions are just representing or fighting for the lowest common denominator in the system, and that doesn't represent all teachers. And so what does it do? It incentivizes the best teachers to leave after a few years when the good ones say...
Yeah, because one kind of person, it creates this adverse selection problem where it attracts people that gravitate towards that lowest common denominator. So if you actually want to boost teacher pay, performance pay, that's the best way to drive quality improvement. And there's a bunch of papers now on that. Ironically, not all of them are in the United States. A lot of the papers are actually based on experiments of in India. There's, the Professor Lavi, something Lavi, Corey, do you remember that name?
I remember some of these India merit pay studies. I don't remember who wrote them, but
Victor Lavi, I think it is. Sorry, keep on going.
But look, even like some people watching may say, well, I don't want performance to be based on test scores, and we can agree to disagree on how much test scores should be a factor, but it doesn't have to be just test scores. You could have some value-added methodology or some test score type components, but you can also, I don't know, how do you know how to pay people more or less in the private sector?
Yeah.
We don't really need to plug everything into an equation. It could just be you kind of know who the better teachers are. You kind of know the ones who are just, not just who the students like and are doing a better job, and the ones who are just making making everybody's lives miserable. You know who the teachers who are just sitting there with videos just playing and not really engaging in instruction. So you could also empower the leaders of the school to kind of make those decisions and let 1,000 flowers bloom and have different types of pay for performance structures based on the school system. And I ultimately think that to get this to work really well, you're going to need school choice too, because, let's say the pay for performance scheme is not working well and it's actually just rewarding people's friends instead of good teachers. Well, then if that's the case, well, if you have a monopoly, it's going to continue down that road. Whereas if parents can say, I see what's going on here and the best teachers are getting the short end of the stick, I'm going to vote with my feet somewhere else. So that's the only way to incent and to align all of the incentives. I think it has to come from the bottom up to make sure any of these tweaks to the public school system actually lead to better outcomes.
Well, sorry, David, go.
That's where I was headed next, and I could sense Corey's voice here. The paper says the lack of power by parents to vote with their feet gives the school boards little incentive to listen to them. This power imbalance between families and the school system means the district can waste taxpayer dollars without meaningful accountability.
Yep.
Sounds pretty familiar. Where'd that come from?
But you're right. If you're trapped in a particular zip code and you don't have the means to get out, that means the school really doesn't have to listen to you. They give you your next teacher. And when we lived in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, fantastic little row home downtown, I think an up-and-coming area with a lot of young families like us, we had to make an unfortunate decision once our child reached kindergarten age. Are we going to send our kid to that school? Or are we going to go across the river where everybody else lives for a much better rated school? Wow. And as much as I wanted to stay within the city and, we lived right across the street from our church, I think we were probably the type of taxpayer that the city probably wanted. We couldn't do it. We couldn't do it to our kid. So it's happening all across the country.
Yeah, and it's a shame that that parents have to choose between, like, there should be, like, we live in the United States. It's a land of opportunity. There should be like good schools out the wazoo, but because of a lack of optionality, a lack of choice, we're kind of forced into that monopoly situation. Really quick, I wanted to follow up that one of the papers I was thinking about the RCT in India. Two last names that I'm going to mispronounce, but it's Mural Diraran and Sundar Raman in 2011 Journal of Political Economy.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking of.
Yeah, and so there's a line from the abstract. It's like, we find no evidence of any adverse consequences of the program, but they do find it. But then the previous sentence is saying that at the end of the program, students in incentive schools perform significantly better than those in control schools by 0.27, 0.17 standard deviation in math and language tests. So I guess just to kind of close the loop on the performance pay is that no one's saying that like every teacher needs to be compensated in the same way. Maybe it varies state by state, maybe it varies grade by grade, but that there is a way to design incentive structures better than just saying like everybody's going to get the same amount. Because if that's what you're doing, then you're going to be cranking out cogs in a machine. Just like we don't want every student to be treated the same way, we don't want teachers to be rewarded in like exact same way. So there's customization, and that's the beauty of choice. And rules get to
my kids are now at a charter school, and at the charter school, they have the kind of leverage at the administrative level to notice a good teacher, notice a bad teacher. There's no metrics for it, but that bad teacher is not going to have their contract renewed. It's a reliable experience of ours. When our child doesn't have a good teacher, they're gone next year.
Wow.
And what we get instead is a teacher. It's mostly based on attitude, about interest in learning, and their ability to dial in to a kid's world and notice that somebody's not learning. The principal happens to be a former teacher, I think, who can see it and knows it when he sees it. He's confident enough to make a tough decision sometimes. That could be performance pay, right?
That's a perfect example. Yeah.
And I think at this point, the school choice revolution is inevitable. We've had 17 states pass universal school choice, or at least a form of it. in the past 4 years. That's more advancement since 2021 in the past 4 years than in the preceding 4 decades. And we can thank Randy Weingarten and the teachers unions for inadvertently doing more to advance school choice and homeschooling than anyone could have ever imagined by overplaying their hand, awakening a sleeping giant, and showing parents what was happening in the classroom through Zoom school. Now, we need some of the purplish and blue states to come along as well. And I think one way to help us get there, if we don't pass a bill, in the immediate term, the way that you kind of get there is to hit the unions at the flanks, get teachers to leave the union. You're more likely to win in the future in those purplish and blue states on the school choice front as well. So these issues are related. And I will say this is ultimately going to help the teachers. I mean, you guys have seen the micro schools that have been sprouting up all across the country. They used to call them pandemic pods during the COVID era, but 10 to 12 students getting together in a household essentially, or another location if you'd like to set it up elsewhere. And parents basically economize on the process of homeschooling. You can hire one tutor or a private teacher, and that teacher could have a fraction of the class size, 10 to 12 kids instead of 30 to 40 in the public school system. They can make about the same amount of money or even more. If you do the quick math, I mean, we're spending $20,000 a kid on average in the public school system in the U.S. today, which is about 60% higher than average private school tuition nationwide. And, the teachers can have a lot more autonomy too. They'll be in a safer environment. They will be able to set up the curriculum and the instruction the way that they would like. And more of that money can go directly to the teacher. You take the $20,000 times 12 kids, that's about $240,000 in revenue. Of course, that's not all going to go towards teacher salary, but if you can cut out a lot of that bloat, if you can cut out a lot of the fixed cost associated with these factory model schools that we have today, you're not going to be creating all these jobs for superintendents and principals, but that's just too bad for them. But it is great news for the teachers, and it's great news for the families who want a form of homeschooling in a way that you get the benefits of that more one-on-one instruction, and that your kid doesn't get lost in the system. And you also get that socialization aspect where, homeschooling, can work with socialization, but it's, you might have to enroll your kid in a community sport or, travel with them and have some more of that interaction. But with the micro school, you kind of get the best of both worlds. So I think that's been a real game changer that has put the NEA on notice. They created an opposition research sheet against Prenda micro schools a few years ago. The Wall Street Journal got a hold of it, and they called them the teachers union's tiny little enemy because, look, this can really shake up the system, and it can change how we view the education system going forward. And I think it's an interesting time to be an advocate for education freedom. Things are changing.
Well, I see the book Free to Choose behind you there.
That's
that
right.
Seems like kind of the theme of the podcast here today, whether it's teachers, whether it's students, whether it's parents, maybe some freedom to choose. Guys, where can listeners find out more about you?
You can follow me on X, at DeAngelis Corey, and if you want to get my new book, it's called The Parent Revolution. It's endorsed by Trump and Ted Cruz on the back, my senator from Texas. He says, you can ruin Randy Weingarten's day by reading this book. I dedicated it to her for basically leading to this school choice revolution. She actually copied the book, just as an aside. If you look at Randy Weingarten's new book, it's the same font, it's the same color scheme, yet the red word minus parent, she used the word fascist. So I think she's trying to call parents fascist. But if you get mine, it's like 40% off on Amazon right now, and it hit the USA Today bestseller list. So check it out.
Goodness, I didn't know that about you.
Oh, you got to see it.
Yeah.
Maybe when they edit this podcast, they can put it on the screen.
Well, it sounds Randy. It's like if you want to learn more about Corey, go to Randy's website maybe. But as it relates to me, I have a website, ChristosMakridis.com. I've got research there, but I'm not as active on social media. But if you find Corey, then you got the goods. So thanks so much, David. We appreciate your interest in this research and just bringing choice to more people.
And I got to say, check out Christos' website because he is a polymath of sorts. There's all sorts of projects he's involved in. It was quite a journey. I went over to the opera. What's it called?
Yeah, so we do some work in the performing arts, and very passionate about cultural impact and just how do we express beauty in the world today. And so it's not just about writing papers; it's also about creating beautiful music. So thanks, David.
Great stuff. All right, thanks, guys.
Thank you.